Alaska is the perfect place to go if you want to get away from the rest of the world. As America's least densely populated state, you have plenty of breathing room from any kind of authority or prying eyes that may want to know what you're up to. For this reason, my home state is very attractive to all sorts of weird and unsavory groups. I've stumbled across Scientology centers at the end of a dirtbag road with nothing else for miles around. Heard stories from doomsday preppers who claim to have bunkers made out of shipping containers in the sides of mountains, and met people who have come out of religious cults in the interior that wanted to keep their followers away from any contact with the outside world. All of this and more you can find in Alaska. I was born and raised in Anchorage, the only big city in the state. Growing up, we had about 250,000 people in the city. It takes about 30 minutes tops to drive across, so that gives you an idea for what up north considered a big city. The only other real city in the state is Fairbanks. These two cities are connected by 360 miles of a 2-lane highway. It is a 7-hour drive one way to get between them through one of the most beautiful landscapes on the planet. Mountains rise up on either side of you between Anchorage and Denali National Park before you drive through these colossal canyons carved out of the rock over tens of thousands of years by melting glaciers and rivers. Past Denali is another 3 hours of driving through a vast flat interior plain with mountains in the distance. I say all of this to help you understand just how desolate it feels in Alaska, even on the highway. After you get out of Anchorage or Fairbanks, there is nothing but wilderness as far as the eye can see, save for the occasional small town with a max population of about 1,000 people on a good day. 10 years back it was even less. Alaskan girls are built tough. We change tires, hunt, fish, camp, and generally have a great appreciation for the great outdoors that women in the lower 48 don't really have if they're near a city. The joke is that Anchorage is the biggest rural city in the country. All this brings context to the following story. In high school things were different, or at least they felt different. I was a young and stupid woman who thought I could conquer anything due to the aforementioned built tough attitude I was raised with. Senior year of high school, I decided to treat myself to a camping trip in the mountains, up past Takitna. Nothing fancy, just an overnight or two in the most beautiful state at the most beautiful time of the year, mid-June. Going up north in peak summer here has a weird feeling to it. The sun never really sets. If you've ever seen the movie Midsummer, that's what it feels like. It gets to about dusk and that's about it. It's still bright and sunny out the whole night through. Shout out to listeners in the far north of Scandinavia and Greenland. The false sense of security I had been thinking that the midnight sunlight would mean safety, which probably nearly got me killed or worse. My second mistake was not telling anybody where I was going. I just packed up for my trip, stopped at a Subway for lunch, and headed out into the great beyond. The drive was fine. A solid 2.5 hours of driving north along the highway took up most of the afternoon as I jammed out to the greatest hits from the radio on Cool 97.3. After you get through the Matsu Valley, you get into the mountains again. Tall spruce and evergreen trees line the road on both sides with the occasional empty space where there has been some clear-cut logging. All of this gives you a sense that while you're out in the wilderness, you are still connected to civilization in some way. This led me to my biggest mistake, not staying at a state park campground. I was in high school with only a part-time job and didn't want to pay the $15 overnight camp fee and was too scared to risk the fine, so I found a spot that looked good and pulled off the road. The map I got from my dad said there was an old mining site up a nearby mountain, so I decided that would be the best spot to head to for an overnight. My logic must have been that it was badass to spend a night in a mining ghost town or something. Pulled off the road, packed up my backpack, put on some bug spray, grabbed my map and compass, and started off in the woods. Now, this hadn't been the first time I had done this. I had been on wilderness backpacking trips on my own with my dad throughout my childhood. I knew my orientation skills and had taken some wilderness survival courses at camp. I wasn't just some dumb blonde wandering off into the woods with no idea of where I was. A solid 45-minute hike up into the hills, and I finally made it to where the old mining camp was supposed to be. There was nothing there, just an old concrete foundation with some holes in it and nothing else. I was very disappointed but unsurprised at the outcome. I set up camp off in the woods and set to building a fire for dinner on the concrete slab. Here you are supposed to set up cooking a ways off from your camp just in case bears are nosy. The last thing you want is a 1,300-pound grizzly poking his nose at your tent, wondering why you smell like Campbell's soup and s'mores. By this time it was getting late, probably 10 p.m., but the sun was still high in the sky, and by the time dinner was over it was nearly 11. I was starving and dug in. About an hour later, it was about as dark as it was going to get, so I hunkered down in my tent for the night, confident that the overgrowth was private enough for whatever animals might come out around then. I woke to voices in the distance and slow movement crashing through the underbrush. My first thought was hunters. My dad and I had run into a few on some campouts, so it wasn't uncommon. I relaxed and figured they would just pass through without incident and closed my eyes again. That's when they found my fire pit. A man's voice cried out into the brightest forest. "Who the heck is camping on our property?" I froze. I knew I had messed up and was getting up, grabbing my purse and putting on my shoes so I could go. Apologizes before I heard the man again. "When we find you, you're dead. You're on private militia property and trespassers get shot here." That's when the whole situation changed. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just pack up my tent and sit with some armed guy lurking around. I carefully put my shoes on, put my keys in my purse, and slunk away into the underbrush as quietly as I could. My thought was to slip away, wait until I got bored and left, then go back up, pack and leave. I spent 20 minutes hunkered behind a log in the woods, barely in earshot before I heard a second voice calling for the other. They had found my tent and were tearing it apart, going through my stuff. I heard one of them shout out, "Bed's still warm, man. Trespasser's a chick. She even left her underwear." The first man yelled out. "Okay, van out and find her. She thinks she can trespass, then there's going to be hell to pay." At that point, I wasn't concerned that I had left my spare change of underwear in my bag, or that these creeps had found it. I needed to get out of there. Quietly, I made my way down the mountain for a good 30 minutes, tiptoeing and taking care not to step on twigs or make a ruckus. After the rustling and shouting of the men had faded quite a bit, I said screw it and booked it as fast as I could in the midnight sun down the hills. I tripped and fell and got scraped up more times than I care to remember. Finally, I made it back to the road, but much to my horror, there was no car. I knew I had come out either up or down the road from where I had been. I couldn't quite remember where I was at the time, but picked a direction and started walking. I rounded a corner on the road and saw my car, and the two men standing beside it. They were armed and dressed in surplus military gear. I hid in the brush on the side of the road and watched. A while later, several more men appeared from the trail I had taken. They dumped all of my stuff next to my car, hopped back in their ATVs, and drove off. I went up to my car, careful not to be seen, and found a note on my dashboard. It read something like, "If we ever catch you on our property again, we won't hesitate to use force. Consider this your last warning." I went back to start loading stuff into my car and noticed what they had done. They'd cut up or destroyed all of my gear, probably as punishment for trespassing. Honestly, I'm thankful they did that because I'm grateful I didn't get shot. Ever since then, I have taken great care to camp only in designated camping areas. To the weird Alaskan militia group, I know you weren't actually going to kill me, but nevertheless, I never want to see you again. This kind of scares the heck out of me. I moved to Denton about a year and a half ago. I was always told it's a pretty safe place, and I felt the same when I lived in my first house. When I moved to my new place about 8 months ago, I didn't think it would be much different. Actually, I thought it would be safer since at my last place, my roommates never locked the doors. In the new place, I have a roommate and a big dog, so that makes me feel safer. We live in a good area where there are families around and stuff, but since I've moved here, there have been 4 different instances where men have come to my house and done something strange. All have occurred to me. All have occurred at night from 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. Not one has done the same thing. The first one happened about a month into living here. It was 3 a.m. and the doorbell rang. Who the heck would be at my door right now? As I'm walking to my door, I can see and hear the person trying to get in. I'm terrified. I look through the peephole and see the silhouette of a guy that looks like my roommate's ex. They had just broken up. I wake her up and tell her. She opens the door a few minutes later and the guy isn't there anymore. She peeks her head out the door and sees the same guy inside my car. She yelled out to him and he sprinted away. 2. The second time it's 9 p.m. and I'm home alone. Somebody rings the door. My lazy butt didn't get up to go get it, and a couple minutes later the door rings again. This time I finally get up and no one's at the door. I open it and see 2 men in an SUV pulling into my driveway. They're almost all the way up to the house. Once they see me, they stop the car, put it in reverse, and leave. I don't know what they wanted or what they were going to do, but it was weird. 3. So one night my roommate is home alone, around 9:30 p.m. and the door rings. She doesn't get it, thinking it must be her Amazon package. They will just leave it at the door or whatever. The door rings again. Confused, she gets up and looks through the peephole and there's a guy with a black ball cap on, looking down so she can't see his face. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I have your Amazon package." "Okay, do I need to sign anything?" He says no. "Okay, so you can leave it on the ground." He ends up just staying there for a minute or so. She nervously stares back at him through the peephole, waiting for him to walk away. He eventually does. For about an hour after that, our big-ass dog keeps growling at the door. She has never done anything like that. Another weird thing is that Amazon stops delivering at 9 p.m. Maybe he was just running late. 4. The last one is definitely the creepiest. This happened last month at around 1:30 a.m. I wasn't home, but my roommate was with her new boyfriend Alex. They're lying in bed, and from the corner of Alex's eye, he sees a pair of eyes in the crack of the blinds from her window. He gets up and runs outside. She sees a grown-ass man in a construction vest looking through her window. The guy jumps when he sees Alex and grabs her trash cans right next to her window. He pretends to just be a trash dude, kindly taking our empty trash cans out for us. Didn't know they had night shifts now, on Fridays. Trash only comes on Monday and Wednesday mornings here. So yeah, these are my stories. I've heard there's a man in the area that the police are looking for. He's forcing himself into women's apartments in Denton. It's sad that I have to live in fear because I'm a target being a woman. It may sound dramatic to many, but after all these experiences I've had, on top of this, the guy that's been named a serial offender is on the loose. I'm terrified to live alone next semester. I've never been scared of that. I'm pretty tall, and I'm a heavier woman, and I've grown up with all brothers. I thought I knew how to fight, but now I'm like, could I even help myself? I'm generally a calm, collected person, but this gives me anxiety every time I'm home alone and I hear something. When I was 11, my family lived in Alaska about 14 miles north of Anchorage. As soon as you leave the actual city of Anchorage, you're in wilderness pretty quick. This event happened to me in the summer of 1977. I remember because the original Star Wars had just come out a few weeks before, and I was obsessed with it at the time. In 1997, the quote-unquote town I lived in was actually just a series of roads and off-roads. Most of the people there commuted to Anchorage for work. That's what my parents did. They both worked nights, meaning I spent most of my time alone at home. I don't have any siblings. Our house was about a half-mile in from the nearest paved road and surrounded by woods. I didn't have any real friends that lived close by. I knew a kid who lived at the end of my road. His was actually the closest house to me and was still about 300 yards from mine. One afternoon that summer, I was watching TV when there was a knock at our side door. I looked outside and saw it was the kid from the end of the street with somebody else. I opened the door and he told me this kid was his cousin, whose family had flown up from wherever they were from to visit. I can't remember this kid's name. I do remember immediately being nervous around this guy. He had blonde hair down to his shoulders and wore a t-shirt under a thin leather vest. He also had one of those wallets on a chain. This kid's eyes were dark as heck. I was 11 and hadn't ever seen evil before, but this kid set off something in my brain. The boy from down the street even seemed nervous around him. He said he had told his cousin about my BB gun and how cool it was. I had recently been given a BB gun as a gift. I told him to wait outside and I would get it. I just knew I didn't want that kid in my house. So I got it and went outside and handed it to the weird kid. He rolled it over in his hands and looked it up and down without his expression ever changing. Without handing it back, he asked me, "So, how much do you want for it?" I can't remember my reaction after all of these years, but I didn't really need money and the gun was a gift, so I told him it wasn't really for sale, and I remember apologizing for some reason. Unfazed, the kid hands the gun back to me, then reaches behind his back and pulls out the biggest knife I'd ever seen. I remember thinking for a second that it was a sword. You've ever seen the movie Crocodile Dundee, where he tells some robbers, "That's not a knife, this is a knife," and pulls out a huge knife? Well, that's the knife this kid had. The kid said, "How about a trade then?" I shot the BB gun at cans. What was I going to do with this thing? Hunt a grizzly bear? I declined the offer nervously, and the kid turned away and started walking in the direction of their house. I went back inside and watched some more TV. About an hour later, there's another knock at the door. I go to our side window where I can see the door. I peek out and sure enough, it's that kid again. This time he was alone. The second time he knocked was louder and he called my name. I stayed quiet. He left the door and started walking around her house. My mom had a sunroom where she grew plants. It had large windows all along the wall. I saw him go to those windows, press his face against the glass and cup his eyes, trying to see deep into the house. I stayed out of sight. Luckily there were no lights on and I had turned the TV off when I heard the knock. When he couldn't see anything, he continued around the house. He took out that huge knife and began tapping the butt of the handle along the outer wall as he circled. Then he started saying, "I know you're in there." I almost shit myself. Of course he knew I was in the house. I was 11 and home alone. How could I have left the house? Hop in a car and take off? Heck, both our cars were gone anyway. I continued keeping low and quiet, hoping he might think I went to a friend's house somewhere else. How long could this psycho just circle the house? He was maybe 14. You have to get bored quickly. No such luck. This kept up for about an hour. The tapping in his voice telling me to come out and that he had another trade for my gun. Screw that. I'd gone all in on the I'm not home tactic, so I stayed quiet and made my way to the kitchen, where our one telephone was. Like I said, this was 1977, with no cell phones, and our phone was attached to a wall in the kitchen. Luckily, it had a super long handset cord. I got it, stayed low to the floor, and called my mom at work. She took me very seriously, but there was no way she could get home. My dad was in the Air Force, and they sure wouldn't let him skip out early to handle his son's crisis. I would have to ride it out. The sun had gone down, and by that I mean it was barely peeking above the horizon. In the summer, the sun never really went completely down in our area. The kid kept pacing around for another 30 minutes or so, and then was completely gone. Not being an idiot in a horror movie, I just stayed down and quiet. Eventually, my parents got home. I was still awake. They brushed it off as to say, "See, nothing to worry about." I never hung out with the kid down the street again, and I pretty much stayed inside the remainder of the summer. There was something wrong with that kid. Maybe it was in my head, or maybe he would have done something absolutely brutal to me, just for that damn BB gun. I was living in Hawaii and had to move to LA for work. I didn't know anyone, was fairly broke, and my job wasn't going to help with moving expenses, so I resorted to scouring Craigslist for a room for rent. After literally thousands of scams or weirdos, I finally found this amazing girl. She was funny, and we had similar interests, and we even worked in the same field. She didn't have a place yet, but she and another girl were looking at several houses that required a third roommate. They were totally okay with doing all the work, seeing as how I was an ocean away. She called or Skyped with me about once a week and sent pictures of each house they looked at. All in all, she was incredible. Fast forward 3 months, they found a huge and gorgeous house. Everything was settled. The two girls, Evan and Juliana, were moved in, and Evan, the original girl from Craigslist, picked me and all my stuff up at the airport. On the ride home, she starts telling me horror stories about her past roommates. Every single one had screwed her over in some horrendous way, and she was terrified of being close to people after that. She said that she wanted us to be the people who turned that around for her, that she wanted us to be a little family. She then drove us not to the house but to a nearby Starbucks, where she chain smoked and told me about her stepdad who was in AA, and how she'd briefly been attending NA meetings after a short bout with painkiller addiction, but she had decided that she wasn't a drug addict and didn't need it. Then she admits that she's only known the other roommate for a month and a half. Red flags all over the place. Why would an LA native need to find strangers to live with her on Craigslist? Why the oversharing about drugs and family, and why had she never had a positive roommate experience? But I pushed it all aside, giving this girl the benefit of the doubt. A few weeks go by in the house and all's well. I forget she ever seemed off, and we start becoming close. Then she takes me on a tour of LA for a day and proceeds to tell me her entire disturbing life story. When I say we had gotten close, by no means were we close enough to make this appropriate. She tells me about her stepfather molesting her, getting sent to a mental hospital when she told somebody about him because he's a doctor and said she was criminally insane, getting raped by a lesbian at the hospital, and beaten by guards, almost dying, her mom's severe narcotic addiction, her ex-fiancé having a psychotic break and trying to kill her struggles with a chronic kidney illness that required many surgeries, and her recent long-term boyfriend disappearing under mysterious circumstances. The horrific stories just went on and on. It sounded like something from a movie, and a part of me questioned if all could possibly be true. But again, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Things go on for a while and my doubts about her subside. Then my food starts disappearing. I ask both girls about it privately, and Evan claims that the other girl, Juliana, had confessed to her that she was a compulsive overeater. Naturally, Juliana claims to be innocent. I side with Evan, and we start mildly bullying Juliana to try to admit that she had been stealing food. The dishes start piling up in the sink and nobody is washing them except me. I ask both girls, and again Evan swears on her life that it's Jules. Finally, Juliana had enough. It turns out she's been eating out for every meal. We all had extremely different schedules, and Evan lied to my face about the dishes and the food. When confronted, Evan starts crying and saying, "How could you accuse me of such things? I'm a good person." And we end up apologizing to her in the end. Finally, the tension builds between the two girls due to many repeats of this situation, and one night when I'm at work, they start fighting. Evan calls me saying Juliana hit her and she's afraid for her life. Call Juliana and tell her to find a new place to live, and she goes to stay with friends and within a week moves out. Now things get really weird. Evan moves out of the master bedroom and starts sleeping in the living room every night. After I repeatedly request that she return to living in her bedroom, she tearfully confesses that she's been on high-dose opiates this whole time and is trying to wean herself off, but it makes her too weak to walk downstairs to her room. Feeling sorry for her, I ended up babysitting her for weeks while she withdraws. It was both terrifying and disgusting, but I really wanted to help her out. During this time, I even seen her naked and realized that she has no scars from her repeated surgeries. Beyond that, she confides in me that she hasn't been working at all this entire time, but has been going out to score drugs and get high every day, and now she's flat broke. She apologizes for lying, saying over and over that she's a sick addict and just needs help. I get her into AA and NA as soon as she's able to walk, driving her daily to meetings and holding her hand the whole time. A longtime boyfriend and her oldest friend move in with us a short while later, to help with bills and all. That's when it all goes from bad to unbearable. Evan goes to visit her mom one night and disappears for a week, returning very clearly high and claiming to be sober. She then starts going on many trips to visit friends in other states and is rarely home. When she is home, she babbles endlessly about how great sobriety is and how she's finally healing, while clearly nodding out on opiates. I end up finding something suspicious on her computer, and she admits to me that she's been working as a call girl and bringing customers to the house. I tell her she has to stop, and she claims she already has. Around this time, she becomes very physically ill. Finally, I get a phone call from her after another absence. She's hysterical. She's, get this, 6 months pregnant. She didn't know because she was high. The baby was severely malformed and there was no way of carrying it to term. I comforted her, thinking that this trauma outweighed all the weird behavior she exhibited. She had the procedure and afterwards disappeared for almost a month. I thought at one point she was dead until she texted me asking if her cat was okay. When she returned, she proceeded to start eating all of our food, using all of our toiletries, sleeping on the couch, and smoking inside, which was not okay with us at all. She was also very clearly on drugs. At first we tried to be nice about it, but she lied, even going so far as to say her room was haunted and the ghost made her sleep upstairs. Finally, my boyfriend snaps and yells at her. She calls the cops and claims he assaulted her. They didn't believe her, but the other roommate did. Then one night when I'm at work, she uses pity and sweet talking to convince my boyfriend that we should all be friends again. I told him it was a lie and he didn't believe me. When I get home from work that same night, my room is trashed, and I asked if he did it, and of course he hadn't. She'd been in there looking for cash or drugs, which I don't do. When I asked her about it, she looked me straight in the eyes and said it was the ghost. After that, she started sending me insane emails claiming that I had been her best friend and had betrayed her, accusing her of heinous crimes and even convincing her she was a drug addict as a form of sick psychological torture. The emails get increasingly intense, becoming 10 to 20 page books about how she didn't feel safe in her own home and how I was the embodiment of pure evil, and that my only purpose in life was to torment her. In these emails, she claimed that she used drugs on rare occasions and that I had made up everything about her problem, that I had been verbally abusive about her abortion, and that we had repeatedly physically assaulted her. We were genuinely afraid for our safety, especially after the police showed up one day and took her in for a mysterious psychiatric hold. We never found out why she was carried out of the house barefoot and handcuffed, but 4 LAPD officers took her in. After that, we just tried to avoid her, but she got the other roommate involved. She even went so far as to claim she had pneumonia from the stress of living with us and our constant abuse. The emails continued to escalate. At one point, she said that I had been a sister to her until the evil spirit in me had forced me to abuse her. This is when I realized that her definition of abuse was a bit skewed, and all of her stories about her childhood, exes, old roommates, and even Juliana had been complete fabrication. Of course, she didn't have scars from the surgeries. Everything she said was a lie to garner sympathy so she could take advantage of people. Now I realized, of course, that she was completely mad. We found a new house, and the night before moving out, I hacked into her email. Come to find out, she had been telling our landlord that we were heinous criminals, and telling her parents that she had been fired from a job because of me and needed money. All kinds of lies. Also, we came to find out that the guy who got her pregnant didn't mysteriously disappear. He ran away because they slept together once, and she started stalking him. Obviously, everything she ever said was a creepy lie. After moving out, the harassing emails and texts continued to the point that I had to have her blocked on both, and seriously considered getting a restraining order. This was about 2 years ago. Last month, we found out that this little girl who claimed to have never been a drug addict and that I made all of it up had died of an OD. She was evil. This wasn't a situation where nobody tried to help a sick person. Everybody around her tried to help her, and she manipulated and used them. I don't feel sad that she's gone. In fact, I still want to punch her in the face. In early 2007, I was freshly 18 and newly married, living in Fort Polk, Louisiana, while my husband was training at Fort Benning. I was born and raised in Alaska, so living in the continental US was a vastly new experience for me. My husband had a weekend off, though he was not allowed to leave the base, so he bought a Greyhound bus ticket for me to visit him and meet the soldiers he became friends with. I had never been on a Greyhound bus before, but I was excited to drive through the South and see new places and have my own little adventure. Sure, plenty of creeps bothered me on the bus and at the stations, but I still had interesting conversations, met new people, and generally enjoyed the experience. Regardless of the time, each station we stopped at was open and offered food, outlets for charging, and bathrooms. So when we arrived in Columbus, Georgia at around 2 a.m., I expected the station to be open. It wasn't. Everyone else who ended their journey had a ride waiting for them, and suddenly I was completely alone outside a locked building in the middle of downtown Columbus in the full dark and terrified. I didn't know what to do, and my phone was nearly dead from the long last leg of travel. I thought about walking to a gas station, but I had no idea which direction to go, and I couldn't see any nearby lit buildings. I truly expected the gas station to be open, thinking I would stay there for a bit while my phone charged and I had something to eat and could have access to a phone book so I could call a cab. All I had was an old sign hanging on the side of the building with incomplete phone numbers for taxi companies. The numbers had faded, been scraped off and defaced. There was only one complete phone number, and it was handwritten in Sharpie at the top of the list. Better than nothing, right? Wrong, because I called the number and a guy answered, casual and sleepy, asking who I was. I apologized, explaining I was trying to call a cab, when the guy perked up immediately and said, "Oh yeah, that's me, I'm on the way." My phone died 10 minutes after I made the call, and it was another 15 minutes before the guy showed up in a traditional-looking yellow taxi. I noticed the cab wasn't marked, no logo, number, rates, or anything, but it had that taxi light thing on the top, and in my young naive mind seemed totally legit. He waved me over. I got and asked him to take me to Fort Benning, finally feeling some relief. The doors auto-locked, and I will never forget the first thing he said to me. He was silent until we got to a main road and said, "Did you really think it was a good idea to call a number written in Sharpie?" I froze. In retrospect, no, it wasn't the best idea I've ever had. I had so few options and didn't want to be stranded in a huge foreign city in the middle of the night. I don't know what else I could have done. After a minute, I tried to laugh it off and hoped he didn't notice I was shaking. I reached for my phone before remembering that it was dead and realized that if something happened to me, nobody would know I had even made it to Georgia. Staring at me in the rearview mirror, the driver told me what was going to happen. "There's no use in getting to Benning this early. The Post Hotel isn't even open. Drive around with me for a while, hang out, and I won't even charge you." I told him no thanks. I really needed to get to Fort Benning right away. "Nah," he said, and that was that. We drove to a worn-down apartment complex where he told me he was picking up a regular to keep me company. I didn't reply. What could I even say? I wasn't raised religious, but I was praying to God for some kind of miracle. Out came a woman who looked a bit like a cliché prostitute. Tube top, mini skirt, smudged mascara, and an unlit cigarette hanging from her lips. Short but ratty bleached hair, pock-marked face, and a cheap purse. I have no idea who or what she truly was, but she got in the front passenger seat and lit her cigarette. She turned to look at me. "Don't worry, he's cool. We're cool." That definitely helped. I had never considered jumping from a moving vehicle before, but even if I wanted to, the back doors were child safety locked and I couldn't open them. Trust me, I tried. I was trapped like a caged animal just waiting to die. I felt so stupid and foolish. Sitting in the back seat of the cab, no idea what to do, and no idea what was going to happen. I kept trying to rationalize it, downplaying the situation in my mind. I was too afraid and frozen to actually do anything anyway. As we were driving around, the girl was telling me about the driver and how he was ex-military and just started his cab business. What a down-to-earth fun guy he was and how lucky I was to be picked up by him. How I was cute and young and everything was cool. Her words were a bit slurred and I knew she was either drunk or high on something, but I didn't really care to know. We pulled up outside a small blue house sometime later, and about an hour after the break of dawn, the driver told the girl to keep an eye on me while he went inside. I'm in full-blown panic mode, the suspense of it all making it so much worse, so the girl offered me a cigarette to calm my nerves. I wasn't a smoker, but I said yes. She got out of the cab and opened my door, stumbling a bit before sitting on the curb and lighting another cigarette. She lit mine as I sat next to her, and I started thinking about whether or not I could outrun her with my heavy backpack and how long the driver would be inside for. Without me asking, the girl told me the driver was inside showering in preparation. I asked what he would be showering and preparing for, but she just kept repeating how he was cool and how much fun we were going to have, and how cute I was. Then she said, "Ranger cab," because he was like a ranger or something. Or maybe that was his dad. He's a good-looking military muscle guy. I feel like God finally answered my prayer when the girl slumped over and passed out in the grass. I saw the track marks on her veins and guessed it was heroin, and apparently the driver was inside taking a shower and wasn't going to be back in the next few moments. I grabbed my backpack and ran like a bat out of hell. I don't remember exactly what happened after I started running. I know I took off as fast as my feet would carry me and that I didn't dare to stop to catch my breath. One minute I was sprinting for my life, lungs on fire, and then I was trudging along with tears in my eyes as I walked through the Fort Benning gate with my military spouse ID, asking how to get to the base hotel. Honestly, I wish I knew how I got there. I was in deep survival mode and didn't stop to process any of it until I made it to my room. I don't know if somebody gave me a ride, if I followed a map or what. I've never blocked a memory out like that before or ever again. I told my husband everything when I finally saw him. He didn't believe me. I probably wouldn't have believed me either. His lack of trust made me think nobody would take me seriously, so I never went to the police. I still had the number I dialed saved in my call history. I knew the girl called it the Ranger cab. What I didn't have was the confidence or support to report it. Sometimes I think back to that day and wonder what would have happened if the girl hadn't let me out of the cab, if she hadn't passed out on the ground, if the driver had never stopped for a shower. It's one mystery I don't need the answer to, though. I used to work as a fetish model. It is something I did after college that helped pay my bills to supplement my full-time job. It is a unique fetish. It has a rather dedicated fan base, and I had quite a bit of admirers, many of whom I stayed friends with after I stopped doing it. Most of them are cool people who don't even really bring up my former employment because they respect me and know I'm a private person. I rarely had problems, but there was one dude who would just send me harassing messages all the time. They were very aggressive and demeaning, and I didn't want that kind of attention. He would then try to be kind for a while and then be a creep. Bang, blocked him and forgot him. He would blow up my phone with calls and texts, and I also blocked him there. He would message me from other numbers, so I just changed my number. On social media, he would make fake profiles and try to harass me that way. I never add anyone I don't personally know anymore. I just ignored him, found him annoying and unbalanced, but not a real threat to me. Many years passed. It had been silent for a very long time, like years. I got a message from a girl wanting to be my friend. I didn't buy it at all because this particular admirer had a very distinct way of writing. Like I said before, very demeaning and demanding, certain phrases, etc. I just ignored the message. I have just started putting myself out there in online dating. I had gone on some lame dates the last couple of weeks. I got a match from somebody and he sounded pretty nice and friendly. After a few messages back and forth, we agreed to have dinner and traded numbers. I have to say the beginning of the date was actually really nice. My date was very considerate. We had easy conversation. After eating and drinking, we left the restaurant to walk back to his place. Even this was pleasant. We got back to his apartment and things are getting hot and heavy. I was really digging this guy until he whispered in my ear, "Why did you make me wait for so long?" When he said that, my stomach did a little flip. I asked him what he meant and he told me that he moved all the way from the East Coast for me. My stomach started to drop and I started shaking. It was then that something in his brain flipped like a switch. Instead of the gentleman I was with all evening, he started spewing all the things my online harasser would message me. Even details from conversations from like 7 years ago, which I had mostly long forgotten about, and he seemed so mad that I didn't remember all of these things. I was standing there shocked and topless, realizing what was happening, and I noticed that he kept looking behind me. I noticed an open laptop, and I am certain that he was recording what was happening. I told him I didn't feel well and needed to leave as calmly as I could, without letting him on that I was terrified. He must have known I was scared though, because he grabbed me and wanted me to swear this wouldn't be the last time I saw him. I smiled and nodded and offered to go out to a dinner. Another night. I don't know if playing it cool was going to work, but very honestly, I was prepared to start fighting if I had to. He relented and let me go to the bathroom to put my shirt back on and was able to walk back to my car by myself. I just drove in shock and silence all the way home. He had given me a fake name to go out on this date. He changed his demeanor, took advantage of the fact that I didn't know what he looked like. I googled his real name when I got home and saw his Facebook page, and that confirmed that he was in fact the man that had been harassing me for years. I hadn't even bothered to look at his Facebook page before because I just always ignored him and didn't feel like he was a real threat. I feel really stupid. So I immediately blocked the number he had been using for his fake name. I guess I will change my number too, since I am sure he will just keep calling. I deleted my dating profile, of course. I won't be going out again for a little while. I am of course going to the police to at least put this guy on their radar. Luckily for me, I didn't mention where I work specifically, and I didn't mention where I live specifically either, so I feel pretty good about that. Now that I know what he looks like, I can at least be aware. I feel horrified and stupid that I let myself be vulnerable. I will say I am certainly paying attention now. I'm a historical reenactor. That's kind of an important part of this story. I'm also a nurse, an ex-soldier, and a bunch of other perfectly normal things, but I do have this one slightly off-center hobby where I dress in clothes about 600 years out of fashion and sometimes try to hit people with a very large piece of steel while dressed as a hood ornament. Now, somebody really needs to write a psychological thesis on the subject, but for some reason, people dressed in historical clothes somehow become exempt from the usual social norms regarding sexuality and appropriateness. If you are dressed and armored as a Viking and wandering the streets of central Sydney, women will let you pick them up and carry them away with their friends without a word of protest. Try it in everyday clothes and you'll be tasered within seconds. And it works the same for women in armor too. Otherwise, normal men respond to armored women in bizarre ways that are utterly outside the normal range of everyday human interaction. I don't know the full explanation for it, but it just seems to be the way people are wired. So I was at a particular prominently enlarged medieval festival or fair for my American readers. The atmosphere was very immersive, and members of the public were encouraged to dress for the part, while the 400-odd genuine reenactors performed a range of the old activities around the grounds and spent the rest of the time wandering about, lending an element of medieval color to the proceedings. Armored, I'm pretty cool if I do say so myself, but my 15th century civilian clothing is to die for. A crimson/silk doublet over black thigh-high boots with spurs, and a pearl earring. And so I was wandering around the event one evening, being dashing and medieval and interacting with the general public as we are encouraged to do. And yeah, I'll admit it, being a little flirty and taking mild advantage of the aforementioned appropriateness disconnect. That seems to take place when women are talking to a guy dressed a bit like Colin Firth in Shakespeare in Love. Here comes the disaster bit. After having fought and wandered around and given 2 lectures, by the evening I was getting a bit wary and sat down for dinner at one of the many stalls selling food. There was a group of young ladies nearby, and playing the part, I engaged with them in character, and we all sat around talking, laughing and mildly flirting for about an hour. Seconds after they left, one of them came racing back and whispered, "Our friend really likes you. Here's her email address," and thrust a folded piece of paper into my hand, then ran after her friends. Well, so far so good, right? Nothing boosts the ego quite like having somebody give you their number unsolicited, and I was quite pleased. But when I got home, the first time I checked my email, there was already an email waiting for me from this young lady. She had been onto the festival's webpage and found my details there. I still managed to feel flattery in response to all of this, and after all, her email was incredibly nice and a little bit apologetic at taking such a step unsolicited, and she was cute enough and had seemed bright and funny when we chatted, so I replied and we sent a few emails back and forth. Mildly flirty, but again, only a few, and when the first nude photos of her showed up in my inbox, several alarm bells went off in the back of my mind, which, being male, I ignored. How much of a stud are you that some women you barely know is sending you naked photos of herself? Big self-congratulatory grins and self-backslaps all around. Voices of caution firmly ignored. And I get a bit more flirty, and in response, she went into utter overdrive. The photos, which had started out as flirty and artistic, became progressively more explicit, until they were soon the sort of thing that I think may even be illegal in Amsterdam. Still flattered, but finding the voice of caution getting louder by this time, I thought it was prudent to discuss with her what exactly she was doing. It was around this time that the terms like love at first sight, soulmate, and marriage were first uttered. Now, I don't lead people on with no intention of following through, and I'm certainly not a user of the find 'em, screw 'em, forget 'em school or any such thing, but this was a whole other magnitude beyond anything I had ever considered, and so attempting to be as diplomatic as possible, I politely declined any further conversation. At this point, it's still a funny anecdote. When she hacked my email account and character assassinated me on a number of online forums and associations I was a member of, it stopped being funny. When she out of the blue called my mother, who she told an amazing story about how I had led her on, even made love to her. Never even kissed her, by the way. Got engaged to her, pressured her to have an abortion, and then left when she miscarried after giving her nothing more than an STD. I wasn't upset. It was the explosive mother phone call that upset me. especially since I had no idea that any of this was coming. I was utterly blindsided. She also sent letters outlining a similar story to my employer, the organizers of the festival where we met, and even to trashy current affairs TV shows. Fortunately, most of the people she contacted gave me the benefit of the doubt, not least because they knew that we lived approximately 800 kilometers apart, and that my easily traceable movements pretty well confirmed that we had only met the one time. This happened in New Orleans, Louisiana a while back. My boyfriend and I and two other couples were partying in the French Quarter, and after several hours and many drinks, we called an end to that part of the night. This was before Ubers and Lyfts. We walked a few blocks from our hotel earlier that evening while it was still daylight, and now, in the early AM hours past midnight, began to make our way back. I was on crutches, not a good combination with alcohol, and began to slow, lagging behind. My two girlfriends, Bree and Z, were a few steps ahead talking, ironically about a strange dude dressed in tights and a cape who'd seemed to stalk us through a few bars, even plastering himself Spider-Man-like against the window of one for several minutes. Our three boyfriends were leading the way while laughing at anything and everything and sharing a smoke between them. Ahead, I watched the guys pass a food vendor and turn down a shortcut alley-looking street rather than continue to the end of the block and turn. The vendor, an older man, says something to Bree and Z, but they don't hear him, still giggling over the night's events. They are on the verge of turning into the alley behind our guys when the vendor looks to me. Just in case he feels dissed by them, I react especially kindly, making eye contact and sending a friendly nod his way. "Little miss, I got you right here." He pushes a steaming white paper wrap over the cart towards me. I start to refuse, but he quickly lowers his voice, saying, "No charge." Something about his tone alerts me, not to mention the food aroma is tempting, and I pause. He then speaks in an even more hushed tone. "Don't look, but they're tailing y'all, since before you crossed. Speaking of when we crossed over from the opposite sidewalk a while back. They're going to roll you." He warns of impending danger to me and the rest of my group now disappearing from sight. I'm freaked out, but remain casual since his furtive manner implies his safety is at risk if he's heard warning us. I holler to Bree and Z and our respective boyfriends to come back and taste this food. When my friends double back, the vendor wraps and serves them each a hot food and ball while quietly repeating what he told me. He stresses staying on the main walk, where it's well lit and busy, and staying out of dark alleys. On the pretext of hanging back while eating, we sneak a glimpse of who we've been so strongly warned about and noticed at least three sketchy guys loitering a few doors back watching us. They look away when we look their way. The Cape man mentioned earlier is not one of them. The scary vibe around them is intense, and I've always been one to feel these types of auras. Buddha and Vendor Man, I've thought about you several times through the years, so thank you for making sure we never met. What would have been our fate that night? I was teaching English in China. It feels like ages ago. I found a really unique job offer combining my love for the outdoors with conversational English. A job which is much more suited for me, rather than teaching in the Grey City. I couldn't have been more excited. My boyfriend and I applied and we were hired. They would pick us up in a van and drive us into the mountains where we would stay in a cabin. What could go wrong? When we got in the van, the driver was pissed drunk. I was young and stupid and thought I could just bust it next time, so I tried my best not to envision driving off the mountain roads. There were two other foreigners, our new boss and his buddy. Boss and buddy spent the time joking around and laughing with each other in Cantonese. I tried to get my mind off the driver by making small talk with two other foreigners who seemed uncomfortable as well. When we reached the little mountain town, we were told that we needed to get passport photos for ID. We paid, which felt scammy, but I shrugged it off. Then I asked to use the washroom, but there was none. I had to walk down the street with my boyfriend until we found one. When we went back to the passport shop, everybody was gone. We panicked a bit and text messaged our boss. He told us that he would be back to get us at 1 a.m. It was 6 p.m. As we stood there on the side of the street, already feeling the cold, one of the guys we had met on the bus ran up. I was so relieved to see him, I asked him where our other new friend was. He had been abandoned as well and had already hopped on a bus to get out of there. My new friend told me that he spoke Cantonese. He said that these guys were bad news and that they had been talking and laughing about their plans for me. I couldn't get him to explain it any more than that. He just didn't want to tell me. The problem was our bags were still in the van. I sent a message saying that we could wait until 1, but I had medication in my bag that I needed to take now, so we needed the bags. A drunk guy showed up and he looked completely bewildered as we grabbed their bags. Our new friend helped us get on the right bus back to the city. He was pretty awesome. I thanked him profusely enough. They kept messaging me for a while, asking what happened, telling me they still wanted me to work for them. Never messaged my boyfriend, and I never responded. I wonder what their plans were, but I don't like to think about it. If that guy hadn't warned us, we would have stuck around though. So, thanks again. I always think I have no experiences appropriate for this subreddit, but thinking about times I've listened to a gut feeling or foreboding, I do think it once saved my ass, or at least all of my personal belongings. This happened last year in China. My husband and I arrived by train around 2 a.m. only to discover that the hotel room in Taiyuan that we'd booked had been given to somebody else and we had nowhere to stay for the night. This was actually not the first time we'd found ourselves on the streets of China with nowhere to stay that winter, funnily enough, so we were a bit stressed but not freaking out. We found a cheap hotel online, planning to stay one night and find somewhere nicer the next day, and took a cab over. It was hard to find, so when we got near, the driver called the hotel. A young guy in a tracksuit came out to the street to bring us up. He seemed pretty normal, if surprisingly energetic for 2 a.m. He took us into a rundown building through an alleyway entrance, and we took the elevator up to the 9th floor. The hallways were unfinished, just bare concrete and exposed wiring. We're led through a straight labyrinth of these halls till we get to the hotel. It's one hallway of rooms, 4 in total. I was pretty on board with everything till we got into that room. Then I started getting a bad feeling. I thought I was just being prissy at first because my primary problem was that there was no sink. Just a bed in a glass room with a squatter and a shower, normal at lower ends hotels in China, but I haven't been to one with no sink. Then I noticed there was a small window by the bed leading into the hallway with no covering on it. Then, while the guy was harassing my husband to try and wrangle more than the agreed price out of him, I noticed there wasn't even a proper lock on the door. I was really not feeling it at this point, and my gut was telling me we should go. My husband wanted to stay. Remember, it's cold and it's 2 a.m. and we've been on a train all day and we're tired. But I insisted we leave. That's when it got really weird. When we came in, there was no sign of another living soul in the building except for us and the young guy. No other guests and no other employees. The place didn't even seem to have a front desk. But when we started walking down the hall, the track-suited young guy followed us and started begging us to stay. Then all of a sudden, about 10 more people came out of nowhere, and they were all following us down the hall, begging us, some of them yelling and touching us to stay. I don't think so. So we left and spent the next hour and a half at a 24-hour KFC down the road and ended up spending 3 times the price for a soft bed and some peace of mind. Well worth it.